Hey guys, thank you so much for suggesting tonight's topic. You always seem to know exactly what kind of evening we need, and this one has been sitting in my notes for weeks, waiting for the right night to tell it. Tonight we are stepping into a movie theatre in 1960. Not a phone screen, not a streaming menu, but an actual theatre, with a marquee glowing over the sidewalk and a line of people waiting underneath it in their good coats. We're going to talk about why going to the movies felt so different back then, and why so many people who lived it still remember the exact seat they sat in. Before we get there, a quick, quiet thank you. If tonight's video keeps you company, consider liking it or leaving a comment. Even a few words help more than you would think, and reading them is one of my favourite parts of doing this. And if you would rather listen than watch, this show is now on Spotify too. The link is down in the description whenever you would like to bring it along with you. Now, go ahead and get settled. Dim the lights if you have not already. Turn on a fan if you like that low, steady hum in the background. Pull the blanket up. Tonight is meant for sinking in, not sitting up. What did it actually feel like to walk up to a box office window and hand over a few coins for a ticket? What did the lobby smell like before the doors to the theatre even opened? What did it feel like to sit in the dark with 100 strangers, all watching the same beam of light hit the same screen at the same time? What did people talk about on the walk home? And just like that, it is 1960. The marquee bulbs are humming against the evening air. Somewhere behind you, a car door closes and someone is hurrying to make it before the newsreel starts. The walk downtown. You do not drive to the movies tonight. Not really. Not the way people drive anywhere later on. You walk because the theatre sits right there on Main Street, wedged between the drugstore and the hardware store, close enough that you have passed it 100 times without going in. Tonight is different. Tonight you have somewhere to be. The evening air still carries the last warmth of the afternoon, softened now by the coming dark. Porch lights are starting to flicker on up and down the block, one by one, like the street itself is waking up for the night shift. Somewhere a screen door bangs shut and a dog barks twice before settling back down on someone's front step. You can hear the low murmur of a radio drifting out through an open window, a baseball game maybe, or a bit of dance music, and it follows you for half a block before fading behind you. Your shoes make a steady rhythm against the sidewalk, a sound you know so well you barely notice it anymore. The concrete is still faintly warm underfoot from the day's sun, and every so often a crack in the pavement makes you step wide, the way you have done since you were small enough to be told to watch where you're going. Street lamps are just beginning to hum to life overhead, casting small yellow circles that you pass through one after another, dark, then light, then dark again. You're not walking alone. Up ahead, a young couple strolls arm in arm, unhurried, clearly in no rush to reach anywhere. Behind you, a group of teenagers laughs about something, their voices carrying easily in the quiet evening. A car rolls slowly past, its headlights sweeping briefly across the front of the buildings you pass, illuminating a barbershop pole, a shuttered bakery, a window display of hats that no one is buying tonight. Everyone downtown, it seems, is heading in the same general direction, and there is a kind of quiet companionship in that, even among strangers. You pass the drugstore first, its soda counter still lit from inside, a few stragglers perched on stools finishing a last cherry phosphate before the evening properly begins. The smell of molten syrup drifts out through the propped door, sweet and familiar. Next door, the hardware store has already gone dark for the night, its window full of galvanized buckets and coils of rope, the kind of ordinary objects that look strangely dignified once the lights go down around them. Somewhere ahead, though you cannot see it yet, you know the glow is waiting. It is the kind of anticipation that builds gently rather than all at once, the way a good evening often does. You are not rushing. There is no need. The picture will not start without the room being full, and there is a particular pleasure in taking your time getting there, letting the walk itself be part of the evening rather than something to get through. A breeze picks up as you near the corner, carrying with it the mingled smells of a town settling into evening. Cut grass from somewhere behind the houses, a whisper of pipe smoke from a man leaning against a lamppost, the faint metallic tang of a passing bus. You adjust your collar out of habit more than need. Somewhere behind you, your own footsteps echo faintly off a storefront window, and for a moment you catch your reflection there, dressed for the evening, moving through the town like you belong exactly where you're going. This is the part of the evening that people rarely mention afterward when they talk about going to the movies. They remember the picture, the popcorn, the seat they sat in. They rarely mention the walk itself, the several unhurried minutes spent moving through a town gently easing into night, past neighbours and shopkeepers and the ordinary rhythms of a place you know by heart. But it matters, this walk. It is the hinge between one part of the day and another, between the errands and dinners of the afternoon and the hushed, shared darkness waiting ahead. You turn the last corner, and there it is at last, still a block off but unmistakable now. That particular glow rising up above the rooftops like something being lit just for you. Your pace, without quite meaning to, quickens slightly. Not urgency, exactly, just readiness. The kind of small excitement that comes from knowing something good is only a few more steps away. It is the kind of walk that is harder to find now, unhurried and communal, shared without a word with everyone else moving toward the same lit doorway. A walk taken simply because the destination was close enough to deserve one. And as the marquee finally comes fully into view, you find yourself smiling, just slightly, the way people do when they are about to step into something they already know they will enjoy. Getting dressed for the show. Going to the movies is not something you do in whatever you happen to be wearing. It is an occasion, small but real, the kind that gets its own little ritual before you leave the house. Your mother is at the mirror in the hallway pinning her hat just so, tilting her head one way and then the other until she's satisfied. Your father stands nearby, adjusting his tie in the reflection over her shoulder. A small domestic dance the two of them have performed so many times they no longer need to speak while doing it. The house smells faintly of hairspray and pressed cotton, a scent that seems to belong only to evenings like this one. You have already changed once, out of the clothes you wore all day, into something a little sharper, a little more deliberate. Your shoes have been wiped clean with a damp cloth, the scuffs from the afternoon's play rubbed away until the leather shines dully under the hallway light. Your hair has been combed flat, maybe dampened first at the sink, parted the way it is supposed to be parted rather than the way it naturally falls. There is a certain seriousness to all this preparation that a child does not fully understand yet, only feels, without being told outright, that the movies are not the same as running to the corner store or playing out back until supper. This is something you get ready for. This is something worth a clean shirt. Your mother checks your collar, straightens it with a light tug, and gives you a look that says almost, but not quite, ready. She licks her thumb and smooths a stray piece of hair near your temple, and you endure it the way children endure such things, with a small huff of protest that she ignores entirely. The living room lamp is still on, casting its warm glow over the room you're about to leave behind for the evening. Your father checks his pocket for the tickets he purchased earlier in the week, or for the coins he will need if you're buying them tonight instead. patting his jacket the way men do when they are quietly reassuring themselves that everything necessary is exactly where it should be. Your sister twirls once in the hallway, watching her skirt flare out around her, pleased with herself in a way that only a girl on her way to the picture show can be. She's been talking about this dress for 2 days, ever since your mother pressed it and hung it on the back of the closet door where she could admire it every time she passed. Tonight, finally, it gets worn for something worthy of it. There is a briefness to getting ready that belies how much it actually mattered. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, spent buttoning, brushing, tucking, checking. And yet those minutes carry a weight all their own, a quiet signal to everyone in the house that something different is about to happen, something outside the ordinary rhythm of an evening at home. Your father switches off the hallway light on the way out, and the house settles into a kind of held stillness behind you, waiting patiently for your return later that night. Outside, the evening air meets you fresh and cool against your clean collar, and you feel, for just a moment, entirely put together, presentable, ready. It is a small ritual, easy to overlook, but it mattered. It marked the evening as something separate from the rest of the week, something you dressed for and thought about and looked forward to. People do not dress for the movies anymore the way they once did, and something quiet was lost in that. The sense that an ordinary evening could be made into something a little more special, simply by taking care with how you looked walking into it. You take your father's hand, or your mother's, and step off the porch together, dressed for an evening that has not even properly begun yet, and already it feels like something worth remembering. From 2 blocks away you can already see it, that string of bulbs spelling out a title in letters taller than you are, glowing against a sky that has not quite finished turning dark. The letters themselves are black, mounted on tracks along the marquee's face, arranged and rearranged each week by someone standing on a ladder with a canvas bag of spares slung over one shoulder. Tonight they spell out a title you have been waiting to see for days, ever since you spotted the coming attractions reel the week before, and decided right then that this would be the picture worth the walk downtown. Around the letters, bulbs blink in slow, deliberate sequence, chasing each other in a loop that seems to pull your eye forward no matter how many times you have watched it happen before. Some of the bulbs burn a little dimmer than others, one near the corner flickering unevenly, the kind of small imperfection that somehow makes the whole display feel more alive rather than less impressive. The glow reaches out well past the theatre's actual entrance, spilling warm light across the sidewalk and onto the faces of everyone gathered beneath it. It catches on a woman's pearl earrings as she waits for her husband to park on the brass buttons of a man's coat, on the excited, upturned faces of children who have not yet learned to pretend they are too old to be thrilled by lights. Even the brick of the building beside the theatre seems to soften in that glow, taking on a faint amber warmth it does not have during the day. You have seen this marquee lit 100 times before, and still, every single time, there is a small catch in your chest as you round the corner and see it fully. It announces itself the way nothing else on Main Street does. The drugstore sign is modest, the bank's is practical, but the marquee is built entirely for spectacle, for the specific purpose of pulling your eyes upward and your feet forward, and it succeeds every single time. Underneath it, the box office glass glows a soft gold, and beyond that, through the propped open doors, you can just make out the deeper red of the lobby carpet, waiting. The whole building seems to breathe anticipation outward into the evening, and you feel it settle over you the closer you get, a kind of shared electricity that has nothing to do with the picture itself yet, and everything to do with the promise of it. Above the letters, a small triangular sign juts out over the sidewalk, the theatre's name spelled out in its own smaller bulbs, blinking on a slightly different rhythm than the marquee below, so that for a moment the whole facade seems to shimmer in 2 competing pulses of light. Pigeons have settled along the narrow ledge just beneath it, unbothered by the glow, tucked in for the night despite the small commotion building on the sidewalk beneath them. A moth circles lazily near one of the larger bulbs, drawn in the same helpless way everyone else seems to be. A group of teenagers stands beneath the marquee now, craning their necks to read the coming attractions poster mounted in a glass case nearby, already debating which picture they will see next week. An older couple pauses just beyond them, the husband checking his watch, unhurried, confident there is still time. Somewhere behind you, a car door slams and footsteps hurry to catch up with the rest of the family already halfway to the door. Nearby, a photographer from the local paper adjusts his camera, angling it up toward the marquee to catch tonight's title against the darkening sky, the way he does most Friday evenings when a picture draws a crowd worth mentioning in Monday's edition. He waits patiently for a gap in the foot traffic, then snaps his shot quickly, nodding once to himself before moving off toward the ticket line to find a face or two worth including alongside it. The bulbs continue their patient chase around the letters overhead, indifferent to how many people stand beneath them or how many times this exact scene has played out on this exact sidewalk. And yet for you, standing here tonight, it feels entirely new, entirely yours, this one particular evening carved out from all the ordinary ones around it. Somewhere above the noise of the gathering crowd, you can just make out the low hum of the bulbs themselves, a faint electrical murmur woven into the evening air alongside the murmur of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter drifting up from someone waiting in line. It is a sound you would never notice anywhere else, but here, beneath the marquee's steady glow, it seems to belong, part of the whole quiet machinery of anticipation clicking steadily into place. Farther down the sidewalk, a small crowd lingers near the ticket line, some already holding their stubs, others still counting change from their pockets, and all of them, without quite realizing it, angling their faces up toward the glow every so often, the way people angle toward warmth on a cold evening even when they are not consciously seeking it. It is the kind of glow that is harder to find now, purpose-built for wonder rather than convenience, blinking not to inform you of anything useful but simply to say, gently, come inside, something good is waiting. And you do, letting the light pull you the last few steps toward the doors, already feeling the evening shift from anticipation into something closer to arrival. There is a woman inside a small glass booth, and she has probably been sitting in that booth every evening this week, sliding tickets out through a little metal tray like she's handing you something far more important than a strip of paper. She wears a small cardigan against the evening chill that seeps in around the booth's edges, and her hair is pinned back neatly, the kind of tidy that comes from long practice rather than fuss. A small lamp glows on the counter beside her, illuminating a stack of tickets and a metal cash box that clicks open and shut with a familiar practice sound each time she makes change. You step up to the window, and she looks up at you with the same patient, pleasant expression she's probably offered 50 times already tonight, and will offer 50 more before the evening ends. How many? She asks in a voice slightly muffled by the glass between you, and your father tells her, holding up fingers to be sure, and she nods and begins counting out the small paper tickets with practice speed. The booth itself is barely large enough for her chair and the little counter in front of her, a snug glass cube lit from within, visible from the sidewalk like a tiny stage of its own. Passers-by glance in at her without quite meaning to, the way people glance at anything lit up and framed so deliberately. She does not seem to mind the attention, or perhaps she stopped noticing it years ago, the way anyone grows accustomed to being watched while doing an ordinary job. Coins pass beneath the little brass grate at the bottom of the window, your father's hand meeting hers briefly through the gap, and she counts the change back with quick, sure fingers before sliding the tickets through last. "Thank you," she says, already looking past you to the next person in line, though there is nothing unkind in it, only the steady rhythm of someone who has done this so many times that courtesy and efficiency have become the same motion. Behind the glass, a small radio sits tucked in the corner of the booth, playing something soft and low, just barely audible over the noise of the gathering crowd outside. A calendar hangs pinned to the wall behind her, a few days marked in pencil, and beside it a small mirror where she checks her hair between customers, quick glances stolen in whatever seconds the line allows her. A cup of coffee, gone lukewarm hours ago, sits forgotten near the edge of the counter, evidence of a long evening already well underway. The tickets themselves are thin and slightly rough, printed with the theatre's name in small serif letters, a number stamped somewhere along the edge. You hold yours carefully, the way you might hold something you're afraid of losing before you even get the chance to use it, though it is only a scrap of paper that will be torn in half the moment you step through the door. Behind you, the line shuffles forward, other families and couples and clusters of friends all waiting their turn at the little glass window, each one repeating the same small transaction that has probably happened here every evening for years. Someone laughs at something said just out of earshot. A child tugs at a sleeve, impatient to be inside already. The woman in the booth continues her count, unhurried, unbothered, entirely in her element. Every so often, someone at the window pauses too long, fumbling for exact change, or asking uncertainly about the show times, and she answers each question with the same even patience, never once glancing at the growing line behind them, as though every single person at her window deserves the whole of her attention for exactly as long as they need it. A young couple ahead of you counts out coins slowly between them, laughing quietly at their own indecision, and she waits, unhurried, until they finally settle on their total. Somewhere behind you in the line, a small child asks loudly whether they will get the seat closest to the middle, and a parent murmurs a patient will see, the same gentle deflection parents everywhere seem to know by instinct. The line moves forward another step and another, unhurried, each small exchange at the window blending into the next until the whole process feels less like waiting and more like part of the evening's slow, pleasant unfolding. There is something almost ceremonial about it, this brief exchange through a pane of glass, coins for tickets, tickets for entry, a small ritual repeated so many times each night that it has worn itself smooth, like a stone in a riverbed, and yet for you, standing here with a fresh ticket in your hand, it still feels like the true beginning of the evening, the moment the walk downtown and the getting ready finally become something official. You step back from the window, tickets in hand, and glance once more at the woman behind the glass before moving toward the doors. She has already turned to the next customer, the small lamp still glowing steadily beside her, the cash box clicking open once more. It is the kind of quiet, patient work that goes mostly unnoticed, and yet without her small window and her practiced hands, none of the rest of the evening could properly begin. Behind you, her voice carries faintly through the glass one more time. How many, steady and unhurried, ready for whoever comes next. Before you even reach the doors, the smell finds you first. That warm, buttery, slightly burnt sweetness that clings to the sidewalk outside every theatre in America. It rolls out from somewhere just past the lobby doors, thick and unmistakable, carried on whatever small draft manages to escape each time someone pushes their way in or out. You breathe it in without meaning to, and something in your stomach responds immediately. A small, hopeful rumble even if you had supper only an hour ago. There is no smell quite like it anywhere else in town, not the bakery, not the drugstore counter, nothing that manages to promise so much with so little. Inside, past the ticket taker, the smell only grows stronger, until it feels less like a scent in the air and more like a texture in the room itself, something you could almost reach out and touch. The popcorn machine sits behind the candy counter, a glass-sided box glowing under its own small light, kernels tumbling and popping in a steady rhythm that you can hear even over the murmur of the gathering crowd. A young man in a red vest works the machine with the ease of long habit, scooping the finished popcorn into a wide metal bin, then pouring a thin stream of golden butter over each fresh bag as it is filled. The butter itself has its own particular smell, rich and slightly nutty, poured from a small spouted pot kept warm on a burner just beneath the counter. It soaks down through the popcorn in the bag, darkening the kernels near the bottom first, the ones everyone secretly knows are the best parts, soft and slightly greasy, and somehow more flavourful than anything on top. You watch the bag fill, watch the butter cascade down over it in a thin golden ribbon, and feel your mouth water in a way that has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with anticipation. Around you, the lobby fills with people carrying their own bags, some already reaching in for a handful before they have even found their seats. Children hold their bags with both hands, careful not to spill, walking with the exaggerated caution of someone carrying something precious. A little girl nearby offers her older brother a single kernel, and he takes it with the solemn gratitude of someone accepting a great gift. The popcorn machine itself hums quietly beneath the steady rhythm of popping kernels, a low mechanical drone that has become as much a part of the lobby's atmosphere as the smell rising up from it. Every so often, the young man behind the counter checks the small door at the machine's base, releasing a fresh batch into the waiting bin below, the sound of it tumbling down like a small warm avalanche. A line has already formed at the counter, families and couples shuffling forward one by one, each waiting their turn for a bag of their own. The smell mixes too with other things, the faint sweetness of the candy counter nearby, a hint of floor wax from the lobby's polished tile, the cool draft that occasionally sweeps in from the street outside. But popcorn is the smell that wins out over everything else, the one that seems to seep into your coat and your hair, so that even hours later, walking home, you can still catch a faint trace of it clinging to your sleeve. Somewhere near the edge of the counter, a small chalkboard lists the prices in careful handwriting, the numbers modest enough that no one thinks twice before ordering a bag for themselves and another to share. A father ahead of you orders 3, one for each of his children, and the young man behind the counter fills them quickly, efficiently, the whole transaction taking less time than it takes to describe. Behind the counter, a second employee restocks a row of candy boxes, sliding them into place with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this every evening for months, while the popcorn machine continues its steady rhythm beside her, filling the air with that same warm, endless invitation. You notice, standing in line, how the smell seems to grow only richer the longer you stand within it, until it feels less like something you're simply noticing and more like something you have become a small part of. There is something almost communal about that smell, the way it belongs to no single person, and yet to everyone in the building at once. Strangers passing each other in the lobby share it without ever exchanging a word, each carrying their own bag, each breathing in the same rich, buttery air. It is the smell of anticipation itself somehow, the scent that tells you, more clearly than any marquee or ticket stub, that you have truly arrived at the movies. You take your own bag now, warm against your palms, and follow your family toward the theatre doors, the smell trailing along with you the whole way, promising that the evening ahead will be every bit as good as it smells. Inside the dark theatre, a young man in a red jacket sweeps a small flashlight along the aisle, guiding you toward an open row with the quiet authority of someone who has walked this same aisle 1,000 times. His uniform fits him with the crisp precision of something laundered and pressed just for tonight. Brass buttons catching what little light there is, a small cap tilted just slightly on his head. He moves through the darkened theatre with an ease that suggests he could find his way blindfolded, stepping carefully around the edges of seats, his flashlight beam low and steady, never pointed carelessly into anyone's eyes. You follow close behind, one hand trailing lightly along the seatbacks to steady yourself in the dark, the way you always do until your eyes adjust properly. The usher pauses at a row near the middle, sweeps his light briefly along the empty seats to confirm they are indeed open, and gestures with a small, practiced motion for your family to file in. "Right this way," he says quietly, his voice pitched low out of respect for the newsreel already flickering faintly on the screen ahead. There is something almost ceremonial in the way he does this, a small choreography repeated dozens of times each evening, and yet he performs it each time as though it matters, because to the person he is guiding, it does. He waits patiently while your father steps sideways into the row, then your mother, then you, each of you murmuring a quiet excuse me to the shapes of strangers already seated, knees drawn back to let you pass. Once you're settled, the usher gives a small nod, more felt than seen in the dim light, and moves on to the next family waiting at the top of the aisle, his flashlight beams swinging gently ahead of him like a lantern guiding ships safely to harbour. You watch him go, weaving unhurried and sure-footed through the dark, and there is something comforting in knowing he will be there again in an hour or so, ready to guide the next uncertain group toward the next open row. He carries, tucked beneath one arm, a small stack of programs for anyone who might want one, though few ask for them this late in the evening, most families having settled comfortably into their seats already. His shoes make almost no sound against the carpeted floor, a quiet you notice only because everything else about the moment feels so hushed, so carefully attentive to the picture already beginning to flicker at the front of the room. The usher's job seems almost invisible in its way, unglamorous, repetitive, performed dozens of times a night without a single person in the audience ever learning his name. And yet without him, the dark theatre would be a small chaos of stumbling strangers, tripping over unseen feet, apologising into the void, unable to find their way. His flashlight is a small kindness extended in the dark, a promise that even here, in the near total blackness before the feature begins, someone is looking out for you. Somewhere near the back of the theatre, another late arrival fumbles with a ticket stub, and you hear the faint murmur of the usher's voice again, patient, unhurried, guiding them the same way he guided you only moments before. It occurs to you, watching him work, that he has probably said "right this way" more times tonight than he has said almost anything else, and yet each time it sounds exactly as courteous as the last. Somewhere behind you, you hear him murmur, "Watch your step" to another arriving family. This same small courtesy extended without a hint of impatience. The 10th or 20th time he has said it tonight, and likely not the last. His flashlight beam dips briefly toward the floor, illuminating a stray-dropped program before he moves on, unbothered, steady, entirely devoted to the quiet task of getting everyone safely to their seats. Further down the aisle, you can just make out his light pausing again, sweeping low along another row, another quiet murmur of "right this way" carrying faintly over the newsreel's narration. Somewhere near the front, another usher does the same work. Moving in the opposite direction, the two of them like quiet sentries stationed along the aisles, easing the whole theatre gradually into its seats before the real evening even begins. You settle back into your own seat now, the fabric slightly worn beneath your hands, and watch the last of the flashlight beams bob and sweep somewhere near the front of the house. There is a peculiar comfort to this, being guided so gently through the dark by someone whose face you barely glimpsed, and whose name you will never know, and yet whose quiet, steady presence, made the whole beginning of the evening feel just a little easier. Your eyes have not adjusted yet, so you feel your way along the row, knees bumping against the seats in front of you, whispering "excuse me" to shapes you cannot quite make out. The theatre around you is a soft wash of near-total darkness, broken only by the pale flicker from the screen ahead and the faint glow of a few small floor lights set low along the aisle. Shapes shift and murmur around you, coats rustling, someone's elbow briefly touching yours before pulling politely back. You keep one hand out in front of you, brushing against the tops of seat backs, counting them silently as you move deeper into the row your usher pointed you toward. Somewhere to your left, a man clears his throat quietly. To your right, a woman shifts her purse from one side to the other, the small click of its clasp barely audible over the newsreel's narration, still playing faintly up front. You step carefully, testing each footfall before committing your weight to it, aware in a vague, instinctive way of all the unseen feet and knees you might otherwise stumble into. Your mother goes first, murmuring apologies as she moves down the row, her hand trailing lightly along the seat backs the same way yours does. Your father follows, and then you, squeezing past a pair of knees drawn back just enough to let you through, murmuring your own quiet thanks into the dark toward a face you cannot properly see. There is something almost intimate about this shared blindness, strangers making small allowances for one another without a single clear glimpse of who they are helping. Finally, your hand finds the specific seat meant to be yours, its worn velvet cool beneath your palm, and you turn and lower yourself into it carefully, still not entirely sure you have judged the height correctly until you feel it rise up to meet you. The seat creaks softly, a familiar theatre sound springs settling under your weight, and you exhale slightly, relieved to have made it without incident. Beside you, your sister is still finding her own seat, a small huff of frustration escaping her as her foot catches briefly on something unseen. Your mother reaches over without looking, steadying her with a light hand on the shoulder, guiding her the last few inches into her seat. "Sit down," she whispers, patient, and your sister does, smoothing her skirt beneath her the way she's been taught, even here, even in the dark where no one can properly see whether she does it correctly. Somewhere behind you, another family is only just beginning their own careful passage down a different row, their whispered apologies blending faintly with your own, a small chorus of quiet courtesy rippling gently through the dark theatre. A child's voice, hushed but audible, asks how much longer, and is answered by a mother's soft, patient shush, the kind that carries reassurance more than reprimand. Once everyone is settled, there is a brief moment of adjustment, coats shifted, purses tucked beneath seats, hats removed and held in laps. Your eyes, slowly, begin to make sense of the darkness around you, silhouettes resolving into recognizable shapes, the outline of the seat in front of you, the pale gleam of the screen ahead, the vague suggestion of hundreds of other heads scattered throughout the room, all facing the same direction, all waiting for the same thing. You glance briefly at your father beside you, his profile just barely visible in the newsreel's shifting light, and then at your mother on your other side, already settled and still, her attention drifting toward the screen. The armrest between you and your sister feels narrow and shared, the way it always does, and you shift slightly, making room, the small negotiations of a family finding its place together in the dark. Somewhere a few rows ahead, a burst of quiet laughter rises and fades quickly, someone whispering a joke to a companion before catching themselves and falling silent again, mindful of the newsreel's narration still carrying faintly from the front of the room. You settle your hands in your lap, feeling the last of your coat's chill finally give way to the theatre's warmth, the small physical settling that always seems to accompany the deeper settling of attention. There is something quietly wonderful about this particular kind of darkness, not frightening, not disorienting once you've found your place within it, but almost cocoon-like, a shared blindness that somehow brings a room full of strangers closer together rather than further apart. You settle back into your seat, still feeling the last bit of tension from the careful walk down the row, and let your eyes finish adjusting, waiting now, along with everyone else, for the newsreel to give way to whatever comes next. The lights have not even fully gone down before a booming, official-sounding voice fills the theatre, narrating footage of somewhere far away, a world event condensed into 3 brisk minutes before anyone has even settled in. The voice carries an authority that seems designed specifically for this purpose, clipped and confident, the kind of voice that sounds as though it has never once doubted a single word it speaks. Images flicker past on the screen, black and white and slightly grainy, a parade in some distant city, a politician gesturing from behind a podium, a ship being launched with great ceremony into grey water. Each scene lasts only a few seconds before cutting to the next, the narrator's voice never pausing, weaving them all together into something that feels, for a few brief minutes, like the entire sprawling world has been folded neatly into this one darkened room. You watch, still settling into your seat, coat only half removed as footage rolls past of somewhere you will likely never visit. People whose faces you will never otherwise see. Events that happened weeks ago on the other side of an ocean and are only now reaching you here, flickering silently above a theatre on Main Street. There is something almost magical in that delay, in the idea that the world keeps happening constantly, ceaselessly, and every so often a small piece of it gets captured, developed and delivered here, to sit beside a cartoon and a feature picture as though it all belonged together. The music underneath the narration swells at certain moments, dramatic and insistent, cueing you exactly when to feel moved or impressed or solemn, whether the footage shows a triumphant homecoming or a somber memorial. You find yourself responding almost without meaning to, a small swell of feeling rising in your chest at footage of soldiers returning home, though you have never met a single one of them, and likely never will. Around you, the theatre is mostly settled by now, coats removed, popcorn bags rustling quietly, though a few late arrivals still shuffle down the aisle, silhouetted briefly against the screen's light before finding their seats. No one seems particularly bothered by the newsreel's arrival before the feature. It has always been this way, a small ritual of its own, a few minutes spent catching up with the wider world before slipping away into whatever story the evening's picture has to tell. The footage shifts again, this time to a stadium somewhere, a crowd of thousands rising to their feet in unison, and the narrator's voice lifts slightly with the excitement of it, describing a moment you will never fully understand the context of, and yet somehow feel a small echo of anyway. Caught up in the collective energy of a crowd captured on film weeks earlier and thousands of miles away. The screen cuts once more, this time to a quieter scene, a scientist bent over some new invention, explaining its promise to a reporter whose questions you cannot hear over the narrator's steady voice. The narrator moves briskly from topic to topic, a flood in one region, a new invention unveiled in another, a brief clip of some celebrity disembarking from a train, waving to a small assembled crowd. It is a strange, compressed little tour of the entire world's goings-on, delivered with the same even confidence, regardless of whether the subject is tragic or triumphant, or simply mildly interesting. You glance sideways at your father, who watches with the same quiet attention he gives the morning paper, absorbing each small dispatch without comment. Your mother, beside him, seems less interested, already glancing toward the little floor lights near the aisle, perhaps thinking ahead to the cartoon she knows usually follows. Your sister fidgets slightly, more interested in her popcorn than in the footage of a foreign parliament session currently filling the screen. Somewhere a few rows back, someone murmurs a quiet comment about the footage to their companion, a brief exchange of opinions swallowed almost immediately by the narrator's continuing voice. The whole theatre seems to absorb the newsreel the same way it absorbs everything else here, together, in the dark, each person processing the flickering images in their own quiet way, while sharing the same collective experience of watching. One final clip flashes past, a brief glimpse of children somewhere overseas receiving a shipment of supplies, waving cheerfully at the camera despite whatever hardship brought the cameras there in the first place, and the narrator's voice softens just slightly to deliver it, before rising again into its familiar, confident cadence for the closing statement. And then, almost as abruptly as it began, the newsreel concludes, the narrator's voice delivering one final confident statement before the music swells to its close and the screen fades briefly to black. There is a small collective shift in the theatre, a sense of the room resettling itself, ready now for something a little lighter, a little closer to why everyone actually came out this evening. The newsreel has done its quiet work, stitching the wider world briefly into the evening before stepping aside to let the real reason for the night begin. After the newsreel comes something lighter, a cartoon that gets a laugh out of every child in the theatre, and more than a few adults who pretend they're only smiling for the kids beside them. The screen brightens with colour now, a sharp contrast to the newsreel's grey, sober footage, and the theatre seems to exhale collectively at the shift. Bright, exaggerated figures bound across the screen, a mouse or a duck or some other familiar character caught in one absurd predicament after another, and within moments the first laugh breaks out somewhere near the front, quickly spreading row by row until the whole theatre is filled with the warm, easy sound of shared amusement. Your sister leans forward slightly in her seat, popcorn forgotten for the moment, eyes wide and delighted as the little animated figure on screen narrowly escapes one disaster, only to stumble immediately into another. She laughs out loud at a particular pratfall, a bright, unguarded sound, and beside her, your mother laughs too, quieter but genuine, the kind of laugh that surprises even the person doing it. The music underneath the cartoon bounces along in perfect sync with the action, a plucky little orchestra hitting every exaggerated footstep and collision with a corresponding note, so that the whole thing feels almost like a tiny opera performed entirely through slapstick and sound effects. You find your own foot tapping slightly against the floor, without quite meaning to, caught up in the rhythm of it despite yourself. There is something wonderfully democratic about the cartoon's appeal, unlike the newsreel before it, which mostly held the attention of the adults. This animated short belongs equally to everyone in the room. Grown men who spent all afternoon at serious work now sit chuckling at a mouse outwitting a much larger, much dumber cat. Women who spent the day managing households now smile at the absurd, exaggerated expressions stretching across an animated duck's face. For these few minutes, the entire theatre is united in something simple and entirely without complication. Laughter shared freely between strangers who otherwise have nothing at all in common. Somewhere near the back, a father who claimed only moments earlier that cartoons were strictly for children now laughs louder than anyone else in the row, caught off guard by a particularly well-timed sight gag, and his own children turn to look at him with delighted surprise, as though catching him in some small, harmless act of joy he had been trying to hide. The colours on screen seem to pulse warmly against the dark theatre walls, reds and yellows and blues brighter than anything you've seen all day. After the cartoon fades, a short subject often follows, sometimes a brief comedy, Sometimes an educational piece about some far-off corner of the world, sometimes a musical performance filmed specially for theatres just like this one. Tonight it's a short travelogue, narrated warmly over footage of a tropical coastline somewhere none of you will likely ever visit. Palm trees swaying gently and footage clearly staged for maximum postcard-perfect beauty. Your father watches this one with mild interest, murmuring something about how nice it must be to live somewhere so warm year-round, and your mother agrees absently, already glancing down to check that your sister's shoes are still on properly. The short subject runs only a few minutes, just enough time to feel briefly transported somewhere else entirely, before the screen dims once more in preparation for whatever comes next. The travelogue's narrator describes the local customs of the coastal town on screen with the same warm, unhurried confidence as the newsreel's voice before him, though softer now, gentler, better suited to palm trees and gentle waves than to parades and politics. You watch the footage of fishermen hauling in their nets, of children running along a beach somewhere you will likely never set foot on yourself, and feel, briefly, the particular pleasure of travel that costs nothing but the price of a movie ticket. A final shot of the travelogue lingers on a small fishing boat, pulling away from shore, the narrator's voice trailing off gently as the music swells to close the segment, and for just a moment the whole theatre seems to breathe out together, satisfied, unhurried, content to have spent these few borrowed minutes somewhere else entirely before returning to the evening at hand. There is a particular comfort in this whole sequence, the newsreel, the cartoon, the short subject, each piece distinct, each offering something a little different, all of it building steadily toward the feature everyone actually came to see. It feels less like padding and more like a proper warm-up, easing the whole audience gradually from the ordinary evening they walked in from into the fully immersive experience waiting just a few minutes ahead. As the short subject concludes and the screen goes briefly, deliberately dark, you can feel the whole theatre settle into a slightly different kind of attention, quieter now, more expectant. The laughter and lighter chatter of the cartoon have faded, replaced by something closer to anticipation. Whatever comes next, everyone in the room seems to sense, is the reason they truly came out tonight. There is a particular kind of silence that falls right before the curtain begins to part, a held breath shared by an entire room of strangers who all want the exact same thing to happen next. The screen sits dark and blank for just a moment longer than feels entirely comfortable, long enough that a small cough somewhere near the back becomes suddenly, briefly audible, echoing faintly off the high ceiling. No one speaks, even the youngest children in the theatre, restless moments ago during the cartoon, seem to sense that something is about to happen and go still in their seats, eyes fixed forward. Somewhere behind the screen, a faint mechanical hum begins, barely perceptible at first, the sound of a projector shifting reels, gears catching, film beginning its careful path through sprockets designed with exacting precision. You can almost feel it in your chest before you properly hear it, a low vibration underlying the silence, a promise that whatever has been waiting behind that dark screen is only seconds from beginning. The curtain itself, heavy velvet, deep red or maroon, hangs perfectly still along the edges of the screen, and you find your eyes drawn to it even though you know it will not move on its own, even though you know the actual parting, if there is one tonight, will be a mechanical thing, a switch flipped somewhere backstage rather than any dramatic hand drawing it open. And yet still you watch it, waiting, the way you might watch a door you know is about to open. Around you, the darkness feels different than it did during the newsreel or the cartoon, thicker somehow, more complete, as though the theatre itself has drawn a slow breath and is holding it alongside everyone seated within it. Your mother's hand rests lightly on your sister's shoulder, a small steadying gesture more habit than necessity. Your father sits forward slightly, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who has been waiting all week for exactly this moment and does not intend to miss a second of it. Somewhere near the front, a single cough breaks the silence again, and this time it draws no attention at all, absorbed entirely into the collective, patient stillness of the room. The projector's hum grows very slightly louder, and a faint flicker of light begins to test itself against the edges of the dark screen, a hint of what is coming, gone again almost before you register it. You notice, in this brief suspended moment, small details you had not paid attention to before. The faint outline of the balcony rail high above, the dim glow of an exit sign in the corner of your vision, the soft rustle of someone nearby shifting one last time in their seat before settling completely still. The whole room seems to be gathering itself, drawing inward, focusing every last bit of its attention toward the single blank rectangle at the front of the house. There is something profoundly communal about this particular hush. Hundreds of people who arrive from entirely different corners of town, dressed for entirely different reasons earlier in the evening, now sitting together in perfect shared silence, all wanting precisely the same thing. No one in this room knows the others personally, and yet for this one suspended moment, you're all bound together by nothing more than a shared quiet anticipation. Somewhere in the darkness above you, the faint outline of dust drifting through the projector's earliest test of light catches your eye. Tiny specks suspended and turning slowly, visible only for the brief instant before the beam disappears again. It is a small, strange kind of beauty, noticed only because the room has gone so entirely still around it. Your own breath feels almost too loud in the stillness, and you find yourself holding it slightly, the way you might hold it walking past something you did not want to disturb. Beside you, your sister has gone entirely quiet for the first time all evening. Her earlier restlessness dissolved completely into the same expectant hush that has settled over everyone else in the theatre. And then, at last, the screen flickers fully to life, a burst of light and sound arriving almost as a relief after so much held stillness, the studio's logo swelling triumphantly across the screen to the sound of a full orchestra rising up from wherever it has been hiding all evening. A small collective shift moves through the theatre, shoulders relaxing, breath released, the whole room settling in properly now for whatever story is about to unfold in front of you. It is the kind of quiet that is harder to find now, a shared, patient darkness holding an entire room together in anticipation of the exact same thing. And as the picture finally begins in earnest, you feel that anticipation dissolve into something even better. This simple, uncomplicated pleasure of finally, truly being at the movies. When the picture finally fills the screen in full colour, it does something to you that a small screen never could, wrapping around your whole field of vision until nothing else in the room seems to exist. The colours themselves feel almost too rich to be real. Reds so deep they seem to hum. Blues so saturated they look wet. Greens that make the countryside on screen appear more vivid than any countryside you have ever actually stood in. This is Technicolor, though you never think of the name while watching, only the effect of it, the way it makes an ordinary sunset look like something worth framing, the way it makes a woman's red dress seem to glow faintly from within. You settle deeper into your seat, the popcorn bag forgotten momentarily in your lap, as the opening scene unfolds across a canvas far larger than anything at home. There is no home screen large enough to hold this, no living room wallpaper bright enough to compete. The screen stretches from one edge of your vision to the other, curving slightly at the very corners of your sight, so that watching feels less like observing something and more like being surrounded by it. Your father leans forward slightly, elbows on his knees, drawn in by the sheer scale of it. Your mother's eyes track the movement across the screen with quiet absorption, her earlier restlessness entirely gone now. Beside you, your sister has gone still, mouth slightly open, the particular stillness of a child who has forgotten, for the moment, that she is sitting in a theatre at all rather than standing inside the story itself. The music swells beneath the opening scene, full and orchestral, filling the theatre from speakers hidden somewhere behind the screen and along the walls, a sound so much larger than anything a home radio could produce that it seems to press gently against your chest. You feel it as much as hear it, a physical presence in the room rather than simply an accompaniment to the picture. Every detail on screen arrives with a clarity that seems almost exaggerated. The folds of a costume, the sheen of polished furniture, the particular gold of afternoon light falling across a painted set. Nothing about it looks entirely like the real world, and yet everything about it feels somehow more vivid than the real world, heightened, deliberate, composed with an intention that ordinary life rarely bothers with. You think, briefly, about the newsreel from earlier, its grey and flickering footage of somewhere real, some actual place captured in black and white, with all the grain and imperfection of unstaged life. This is different entirely. This is a world built specifically to be looked at, every colour chosen, every shadow placed, every frame considered before it ever reached this screen. There is something almost indulgent about watching it, a small luxury folded into the price of your ticket. The camera pulls back to reveal a sweeping vista, mountains or a coastline or some grand interior, and the whole theatre seems to lean forward as one, drawn by the sheer scale of what fills the screen. A woman a few rows ahead lets out a small, involuntary breath at the sight of it, and you understand exactly why, because you feel the same small catch in your own chest. Somewhere in the story a close-up arrives, an actor's face filling the entire screen, 10 feet tall, every small expression magnified far beyond what any human face could show at ordinary size. You watch every flicker of emotion pass across those enormous features, and it feels almost too intimate, too close, the way it might feel to stand only inches from someone's face in real life. Except here you can look as long as you like without anyone noticing. The picture continues, scene folding into scene, and the colour never lets up, never fades into something more ordinary. Every new setting arrives freshly saturated, freshly composed, as though someone somewhere has decided that the world deserves to look this vivid, and has simply made it so, at least here. At least for the length of this reel. You glance sideways once just to see the light of the screen reflected faintly on your family's faces, the colours dancing there too, shifting with every cut and every scene change. It occurs to you that everyone in this theatre is being washed in the exact same coloured light at the exact same moment. Hundreds of faces glowing red or gold or blue in perfect unison, bound together by nothing more than the picture unfolding above you all. Somewhere near the middle of the story, the camera settles briefly on a still, quiet moment, a single actor standing alone against a painted sky, and even in stillness the colour refuses to fade, holding steady, vivid, insistent on being seen fully. You find yourself simply looking, not following plot or dialogue for a moment, just absorbing the sheer visual fact of it. It is the kind of spectacle that is harder to find now, a screen built specifically to overwhelm the eye, to make the ordinary world outside feel briefly monochrome by comparison. And as the story pulls you further in, you forget entirely about the seat beneath you, the popcorn cooling in your lap, the theatre walls just beyond the edges of your vision, replaced instead by nothing but colour, motion, and the particular, wonderful sense of having stepped fully into somewhere else. Partway through a longer picture, the lights rise just enough for people to stretch, whisper, and decide whether this is the moment to brave the concession line one more time. The change happens gradually at first, a faint brightening along the edges of the theatre that you almost do not notice until the screen fades to a title card reading Intermission, the letters plain and unhurried against a soft, neutral background. A low murmur rises through the room immediately, hundreds of quiet conversations starting up all at once, the particular sound of an audience remembering all together that it has a body as well as an attention span. Your father rolls his shoulders back with a small groan, the posture of a man who's been sitting still longer than he realized. Your mother reaches up to touch her hair lightly, checking that the evening's careful arrangement has survived the first half of the picture. Your sister twists in her seat to look behind her, taking in the theatre properly for the first time since the feature began. The balcony rail, the exit signs glowing faintly red, the rows and rows of other families now stretching and murmuring the same way yours is. Around you, people rise in twos and threes, murmuring "excuse me" down the rows the same careful way you did when you first arrived, though this time your eyes are already adjusted, and the whole aisle feels less like a blind negotiation and more like an ordinary walk. Someone a few rows up laughs at something their companion whispers, the sound carrying easily, now that the newsreel's hush has fully broken. The lobby, when you reach it, feels different than it did earlier in the evening. Busier now, filled with a fresh crowd of people all moving in the same restless, purposeful way, some heading toward the candy counter, others toward the restrooms tucked along the side hallway, still others simply standing near the doors for a breath of cooler evening air. The popcorn smell has settled into something familiar rather than overwhelming, a background note now rather than the main event. Your father checks his watch, more out of habit than actual concern, and murmurs something about how much of the picture remains, though no one seems particularly worried about missing anything. Intermission, after all, is built into the evening itself, expected, planned for, part of the whole shape of a night at the movies, rather than an interruption to it. You watch a group of teenagers cluster near the lobby's far wall, trading opinions about the picture so far in hushed, urgent voices, clearly unable to wait until the ride home to discuss it. An older couple sits together on a small bench near the entrance, not moving at all, content simply to rest for these few minutes before the second half begins. A little boy races past, weaving between legs, chased half-heartedly by an older sister sent to retrieve him. Your mother decides, after a moment's consideration, that this is indeed the moment for one more treat, and steers your small group toward the candy counter, where the line has already formed again, though shorter now than it was before the picture started. The young man behind the counter works with the same unhurried efficiency as before, refilling bags, making change, calling out thank you to each departing customer. Somewhere near the restroom hallway, a woman fusses briefly with her daughter's hair ribbon, retying it while the girl squirms impatiently, eager to return to her seat before she misses anything important. A father consults with his son in low, serious tones about whether the hero on screen will manage to escape whatever predicament the first half left him in, and the boy offers his own confident theory, delivered with the total certainty only a child can muster. The lights overhead remain at their gentle intermission, brightness throughout all of this, warm and even, illuminating a room that only minutes ago existed purely in flickering reflected colour. It is strange, almost, to see everyone's faces properly again, in ordinary light, rather than washed in whatever hue the screen happened to be casting at any given moment. Eventually a soft chime sounds, somewhere near the entrance to the theatre itself, a gentle signal that the second half is only a few minutes off, and the crowd begins its slow reverse migration, cups and candy boxes in hand, back down the aisle toward the seats you left only minutes before. Your family gathers itself together again, and you file back into your row with far less uncertainty than the first time, familiar now with exactly where your seat is waiting. A few stragglers hurry down the aisle just as the lights begin to lower, murmuring quiet apologies to the row already resettled. The same small courtesy that marked the very start of the evening now repeating itself in miniature. The lights begin their slow dim once more as you settle back in, the murmur of the lobby fading behind you, replaced gradually by the particular hush that always precedes a picture's return. It is a small, unremarkable pause in the middle of the evening, and yet somehow it feels like its own complete little world, a breath taken exactly halfway through, before the story pulls you back in for whatever comes next. The counter glows warm and inviting, glass cases lit from below, rows of chocolate bars and boxed candies lined up like small treasures waiting to be chosen. You approach it slowly, the way anyone approaches a decision that feels bigger than it actually is, eyes moving across the neat rows of options arranged behind the glass. There are chocolate-covered raisins in small boxes, their cardboard printed with bright, cheerful lettering. There are licorice ropes coiled beside peppermint drops, and beside those bars of chocolate wrapped in foil that catches the counter's warm light and throws it back in small glinting flashes. The glass itself is spotless, wiped down between customers by the young man working the register, whose apron already carries a faint dusting of powdered sugar from some earlier transaction. He waits patiently while you deliberate, hands resting lightly on the counter's edge, in no particular hurry despite the line building steadily behind you. Your sister presses close to the glass, nose nearly touching it, torn between the chocolate-covered peanuts and a small box of gumdrops and colours, bright enough to rival the picture you're about to watch. Your father, meanwhile, has already made up his mind, the same choice he makes every single time, a habit so consistent that the young man behind the counter reaches for it, almost before it is asked for. The counter itself hums faintly with the low buzz of the display case lights, a warm undertone beneath the murmur of the gathering crowd. Above the glass, a hand-lettered sign lists prices in careful script, the numbers modest enough that no one hesitates long over the cost, only over the far more difficult question of which sweet actually deserves tonight's selection. Somewhere down the counter, a woman asks about a box of candies she does not immediately recognise, and the young man explains its contents with the patient thoroughness of someone who fields the same question several times a night. She nods, satisfied, and adds it to her small pile of selections, along with a bag of popcorn for her husband waiting a few steps back, hands in his pockets, watching the whole transaction with mild amusement. The candy counter, unlike the popcorn machine beside it, offers no sound of its own, no comforting mechanical rhythm, only the quiet glow of its glass cases and the occasional soft rustle of wrapped paper as items are lifted out and handed across. And yet it carries its own particular kind of anticipation, a smaller, sweeter cousin to the anticipation building toward the picture itself. Your mother finally decides on a small box for the family to share, a compromise reached after a brief good-natured negotiation with your sister, who had hoped for something entirely her own. The young man rings it up with practiced speed, sliding the box across the counter along with your change, counted out quickly and precisely the same way tickets were counted only minutes before, at the box office window. A child a few places ahead in line changes her mind 3 separate times before finally settling on her choice, and the young man behind the counter waits through each reversal without the faintest trace of impatience, sliding the final selection across the glass with the same easy warmth he has offered everyone else tonight. Behind you, another family steps up to take your place, already debating their own choices in the same hushed, deliberative tones you used only moments earlier. It occurs to you, moving away from the counter, that this same small ritual is repeating itself constantly throughout the evening, dozens of families each taking their turn at the glowing glass case, each walking away with their own small treasure tucked carefully in hand. The candy itself, once you finally settle into your seat and unwrap it, tastes exactly as good as the anticipation promised, sweet and familiar, a small companion to the popcorn already resting in your lap. Your sister savours hers slowly, making it last, while your father unwraps his own choice with the quiet satisfaction of a man enjoying a small, entirely predictable pleasure. There is something almost comforting in the candy counter's simplicity. No great spectacle attached to it, no dramatic lighting or booming narration, just rows of familiar sweets glowing softly behind glass, waiting patiently for whoever happens to want them. It asks nothing of you beyond a small decision and a few coins, and offers in return a modest but genuine pleasure that somehow feels perfectly suited to an evening built entirely around small, accumulated delights. As the lights begin to dim once more for the second half of the picture, you catch one last glimpse of the counter glowing behind you, its glass cases still lit warmly for whoever might wander up during intermission, patient and unchanging, ready for the next small decision someone else is about to make. On Saturdays, one ticket buys you 2 whole pictures, a bonus that makes the evening stretch long enough that you lose track of what time you actually walked in. There is something almost extravagant about it. The idea that a single coin handed through the box office window earns you not 1 story but 2, an entire evening's worth of entertainment folded into a single ticket stub. You settle into your seat on Saturday differently than you do any other night of the week, aware that the hours ahead stretch out generously, unhurried, with no need to watch the clock the way you might on an ordinary Tuesday. The first picture unfolds the same way any feature does, newsreel and cartoon giving way to the main event. But there is a particular ease to watching it, knowing that afterward, rather than filing back out into the evening, you will simply settle in for more. Your father, who normally checks his watch once or twice during a picture, sets it aside entirely tonight, leaning back with the unhurried posture of a man who has nowhere else to be. Between the 2 features, there is often a second small intermission, shorter than the first, just enough time for another trip to the concession counter, another stretch of the legs, another round of whispered opinions about what has happened so far. Your sister, who normally begins to fade by the second half of a single picture, seems to draw fresh energy from the knowledge that there is still another entire story waiting. The second picture rarely matches the first in scale or spectacle, often a smaller production, sometimes an older release making its way back through theatres for a second run. But there is a particular charm in that too, a sense of discovering something slightly overlooked, slightly humbler, tucked in alongside tonight's main attraction. You settle into it with the relaxed attention of someone who has already gotten their money's worth and is now simply enjoying whatever comes next. Around you, the theatre's rhythm shifts subtly for the second feature, a little looser, a little more forgiving. Children who managed to sit perfectly still through the first picture now shift and whisper more freely, their parents less inclined to hush them, everyone slightly worn down in the pleasant way a long good evening wears a person down. Someone a few rows back has fallen asleep entirely, chin dropped to their chest, and no one seems bothered by it. You lose track, somewhere during the second picture, of what time it actually is outside. Whether the sky has gone fully dark yet, whether your neighbours are settling in for their own quiet evenings at home, time inside the theatre has its own separate shape on a Saturday, stretched and generous, measured not in hours but in reels, in stories, in the particular satisfaction of having gotten more than you expected for the price of admission. Your mother, beside you, has long since stopped glancing toward the aisle or checking on your sister's shoes, settled fully now into the rhythm of the evening, content simply to watch whatever unfolds next. Your father's eyes stay fixed on the screen with the same steady attention he gave the first picture, unbothered by the lateness of the hour, entirely willing to let the evening run its full generous course. When the second picture finally ends and the house lights rise fully for the last time, there is a different quality to the crowd's movement than after a single feature. Slower, more reluctant, everyone blinking against the brightness and stretching muscles that have been still far longer than usual. Conversations start up around you, not just about one picture, but about two. Opinions overlapping, favourite scenes from each competing for attention. Outside, the evening air feels different than it did hours earlier when you first walked in. Cooler, later, the street quieter than it was, most of the shops long since closed for the night. You realise, stepping out into it, just how much time has actually passed, how thoroughly the double feature swallowed the entire evening whole. Somewhere behind you, another family lingers on the sidewalk a moment longer than usual, clearly reluctant to let the evening end, trading their own favourite moments from both pictures before finally turning toward home. It is the kind of value that is harder to find now. An entire evening's worth of stories folded into a single ticket, a single walk downtown, a single night spent losing all sense of time in the comfortable dark. And walking home afterward, sleepy and satisfied, you carry with you not one story but two, tangled together now in your memory, both equally part of this one particular Saturday night. In the daylight hours, the theatre belongs to a different crowd entirely. Children clutching coins from their allowance, here for cartoons, serials, and a few blessed hours away from their parents. The marquee looks different in the bright afternoon sun than it does at night, its bulbs unlit now, the letters plain and unglamorous against the daylight, and yet the theatre itself buzzes with an energy all its own, a particular chaos that only exists on Saturday afternoons, when every child within walking distance seems to converge on the same few square feet of sidewalk. You arrive clutching your own coins, counted and recounted on the walk over, already calculating exactly how much will be left for candy once the ticket is paid for. Around you, other children do the same math out loud, comparing totals, negotiating small trades, 1 nickel for 2 dimes, already deep in the particular commerce of childhood that requires no adult supervision at all. Inside, the lobby feels louder than it ever does in the evening, filled entirely with young voices, shouting greetings to friends spotted across the room, arguing cheerfully about which seats to claim, negotiating who sits beside whom. There are no ushers gently sweeping flashlights through hushed darkness this afternoon, only harried teenagers trying to keep some semblance of order among a crowd that has little interest in order of any kind. The newsreel, when it comes, draws considerably less attention than it does in the evening crowd, children shifting and whispering through it, waiting impatiently for the parts of the afternoon they actually came for. But the moment the cartoon begins, the entire theatre erupts into laughter, louder and rowdier than any evening crowd would ever produce, uninhibited by the presence of parents or the expectation of quiet adult composure. Then comes the serial, The real reason so many children return week after week, a continuing story that always seems to end at its most dramatic possible moment. The hero dangling from some impossible height, or trapped in some inescapable predicament, promising resolution only if you return next Saturday. A collective groan rises through the theatre every time the screen fades to a bold to be continued, immediately followed by excited chatter about what might happen next. You settle into your seat between two friends from down the block, a bag of candy already half consumed though the main feature has not even started yet. Somewhere nearby, a group of younger children argue in hushed but urgent voices about whose turn it is to hold the shared bag of popcorn, a negotiation eventually settled by an older sibling acting as reluctant referee. The theatre on Saturday afternoon smells slightly different too, less of the evening's careful, orchestrated perfume, and more of simple, chaotic childhood, sticky candy and warm popcorn and the faint mustiness of a building that has been full of restless children since the doors opened. No one minds. It is part of what makes the afternoon feel entirely separate from the more composed evenings that happen here. By the time the main feature begins, some of the earlier chaos has settled, at least a little. Children drawn in by the story despite themselves, though never quite as fully hushed as an evening crowd. Whispered commentary continues throughout, favourite characters cheered on, villains booed with theatrical enthusiasm, the whole experience closer to a shared performance than a quiet individual viewing. Outside, parents drop off their children with instructions to be back at a certain hour, then disappear for a few blessed hours of their own. Errands run without small hands tugging at sleeves, coffee drunk without interruption. The whole afternoon suddenly, briefly, entirely their own. It is an arrangement that suits everyone involved. Children thrilled to be free of supervision for an afternoon, parents grateful for a few hours of peace, the theatre itself content simply to be full. When the final feature ends and the matinee crowd spills back out onto the sidewalk, blinking against daylight that somehow feels different now, later than it did only a few hours earlier, there is a particular satisfaction in the noise of it all. Children comparing notes on the serial's cliffhanger, trading theories about next week's episode, already looking forward to returning. A few children linger near the entrance a while longer, reluctant to leave the small, unsupervised kingdom the afternoon provided, before finally scattering off in different directions toward home, still arguing happily about the serial's final, unresolved moment. It is the kind of afternoon that is harder to find now, an entire theatre given over completely to childhood for a few unsupervised hours, cartoons and serials and candy purchased with carefully counted allowance, and a whole small society of children operating entirely on its own rules, answerable to no one but each other until the moment their parents come to collect them. Before the feature begins, a burst of dramatic music and fast-cut footage promises you next week's picture, and you leave already deciding whether you will be back. The screen shifts abruptly from the short subject's gentle pacing into something far more urgent, a swelling orchestral cue announcing that whatever comes next demands your full attention. Bold lettering fills the screen, the title of next week's picture spelled out in dramatic, oversized type, followed immediately by a rapid succession of images meant to convey an entire story's worth of excitement in under 2 minutes. A woman screams silently on screen, her expression caught mid-gasp before the image cuts away entirely to a car racing along a cliffside road. A narrator's voice, different from the newsreel's steady authority, adopts instead a breathless, urgent tone, promising danger, romance, adventure, sometimes all three within the same single sentence. You lean forward slightly, caught despite yourself by the sheer momentum of it. Your father murmurs something about having read a review of this particular picture, already forming an opinion about whether it will be worth the walk downtown next week. Your mother watches with a more sceptical eye, having been disappointed by the promise of coming attractions before, aware that the two most exciting minutes of a picture are sometimes generously front-loaded into its trailer. The footage cuts rapidly between scenes, never lingering long enough for you to fully understand any single moment, only long enough to plant the seed of curiosity. A dramatic embrace, a gunshot, a crumbling building, a burst of laughter from an actor whose name flashes briefly across the bottom of the screen in smaller lettering than the title itself deserves. Each fragment promises an entire story you have not yet seen, dangled just long enough to leave you wanting more. Your sister, easily persuaded by spectacle of any kind, has already decided she wants to return next week, tugging at your mother's sleeve to ask if they can come back for it. Your mother offers only a non-committal, we'll see. The same careful deflection she offers for most requests made in the heat of an exciting moment, though you suspect, watching her expression, that she is at least a little bit tempted herself. The trailer builds to its climax, a final burst of dramatic music accompanying one last striking image, perhaps a hero silhouetted against an explosion, or two lovers reaching for each other across some impossible distance, before the title card returns one final time, larger now, more insistent, followed by the coming soon lettering that has launched 1,000 Saturday evening plans. Around you, the theatre buzzes quietly with reactions, some murmured excitement, some sceptical silence, a few audible groans from those who recognise an actor they particularly dislike, and a scattering of enthusiastic whispers from those already planning their return. It is a small, communal moment of anticipation squeezed into the middle of tonight's evening, a preview not just of a picture but of an entire future outing, not yet decided but already half imagined. A second trailer sometimes follows the first, shorter, less elaborate, perhaps announcing a smaller picture or a return engagement of something already popular, and the theatre's attention dips slightly during this one, less urgent, less rehearsed in its excitement, though still enough to plant a small additional seed of curiosity in at least a few members of the audience. You find yourself, without quite meaning to, already picturing next Saturday, the walk downtown repeated, the marquee glowing with a different title, the whole familiar ritual beginning again from scratch. It is a strange kind of anticipation, borrowed from a picture you have not seen advertising a picture you have not yet seen either, and yet it works on you exactly as intended. The screen fades briefly to black after the trailer concludes, a short pause before whatever comes next, and in that pause you glance sideways at your family, wondering whether any of them are thinking the same thing you are, already planning next week's outing before tonight's has even properly begun. It is the kind of small promise that is harder to find now, a brief, breathless glimpse of something not yet available, dangled in front of an entire theatre full of people who will spend the coming week deciding, based on nothing more than 2 minutes of carefully chosen footage, whether they will make the same walk downtown again. And more often than not, judging by the murmurs rippling through the room around you, they will. Outside, a hand-painted sign in the window boasts of cool air inside, and on a sweltering July evening, that alone is almost reason enough to buy a ticket. The sign hangs slightly crooked in the theatre's front window, lettered by hand in bold blue paint against a white background. The words cool inside underlined twice for emphasis, as though the theatre management understood exactly what would draw a crowd on an evening like this one. Beneath the words, a small painted icicle drips cheerfully, an entirely unnecessary flourish that nonetheless catches your eye every single time you pass it. You feel the heat of the evening pressing against your back as you read it, the kind of thick, humid warmth that clings to your clothes and makes even a short walk downtown feel like an effort. Sweat has already gathered faintly at your collar, and the promise of that sign, "Cool inside," feels less like advertising and more like a genuine mercy being offered to anyone willing to hand over their ticket money. Around you, other families pause at the same sign, some pointing it out to children who do not yet understand why anyone would need to advertise something as simple as temperature, others simply nodding to themselves in quiet, grateful acknowledgement. A woman fans herself with a folded church bulletin while she waits in the ticket line, visibly counting down the minutes until she can step through the doors into whatever relief awaits inside. The moment you actually cross the threshold, the change is immediate and almost startling. A wall of cooled air meeting you the instant the lobby doors swing shut behind you. So different from the heavy evening heat outside that you feel your whole body relax within a few steps. Your damp collar cools rapidly. The sweat at your temples begins to dry. You breathe in deeply, savouring air that feels almost artificially crisp compared to the thick summer evening you just left behind. Few homes in town can boast anything like it, certainly not yours, where the best relief on a night like this comes from an open window and a fan set on its highest, noisiest setting. The theatre's cooling system is a marvel of a different order entirely, mechanical and modern, humming somewhere behind the walls with the same quiet, tireless dedication as the popcorn machine, though its product is invisible, felt rather than seen. Your father remarks, as he does most summer evenings like this one, that a picture would have to be truly terrible to make the ticket price not worth it, given the air alone. Your mother agrees, already visibly more comfortable than she was only minutes ago on the sidewalk, her earlier flush fading as the cool air continues its steady work. Inside the theatre itself, the temperature holds even and constant throughout the whole evening, entirely unaffected by the summer heat still building outside, still radiating up from sidewalks that will not properly cool until well past midnight. It is a small, specific luxury, easy to take for granted once you are settled in your seat, but felt keenly again the moment you eventually step back outside into the lingering warmth of the summer night. Some evenings you notice families arriving who seem less interested in whatever picture is playing and more interested simply in escaping their own overheated houses for a few hours, content to sit through nearly anything so long as the air stays cool and the seats stay comfortable. No one judges them for it. Everyone understands on a night like this that the picture itself is almost secondary to the relief. Somewhere near the middle of the picture, you notice a man 2 rows ahead has fallen entirely asleep, head tipped back, mouth slightly open, clearly more interested in the cool air than in whatever story unfolds on screen, and no one seems to mind, understanding perfectly well why he might have come tonight regardless of the picture playing. By the time the feature ends and you step back out onto the sidewalk, the heat meets you again immediately, thick and unchanged, as though it had been patiently waiting the whole time for your return. The contrast feels sharper now than it did walking in, the cool of the theatre lingering pleasantly in your memory even as the summer evening reasserts itself around you. It is the kind of small comfort that is harder to find now, a hand-painted promise fulfilled the moment you step through the doors, a few hours of genuine relief bought for the price of a ticket, on an evening when the whole rest of town is still waiting, patiently and uncomfortably, for the heat to finally break. Later in the evening, a different kind of theatre opens up entirely, one where you never even have to leave your car, and the screen rises up out of an open field like something out of a dream. You see it long before you actually arrive, a massive white rectangle standing alone against the darkening sky, taller than any building in town, visible from the main road well before the turn-off into the gravel lot beneath it. There is something almost otherworldly about its size out here, away from the tidy storefronts and marquees of downtown, planted instead in what was clearly an open field not so long ago, surrounded now by rows of gravel and a low wooden fence. A young man in a booth waves your father's car forward, collecting the admission with far less ceremony than the box office window downtown, more of a quick transaction conducted through a rolled-down window than the small ritual of the glass ticket booth. He points toward an open row, and your father steers the car carefully across the uneven gravel, following a path lit only by small, low lamps set into the ground at intervals. The lot itself hums with a particular kind of energy. Dozens of cars angled toward the same enormous screen, headlights winking out one by one as families settle in for the evening, engines ticking as they cool in the warm night air. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter carries from an open car window, and further off, the low murmur of a radio drifts from another vehicle entirely, tuned already to whatever station will carry tonight's picture sound. The screen itself, still blank and pale in the fading light, seems to hold the whole field's attention even before the picture begins, an enormous, patient presence rising up against a sky now shifting from orange to deep blue. Birds cross in front of it occasionally, small dark silhouettes against all that white, gone again in an instant. Your mother passes snacks brought from home into the back seat, wrapped sandwiches and a thermos of something warm despite the summer evening. The drive-in's own concession stand reserved for later, for popcorn and cold drinks rather than a proper supper. There is something pleasantly makeshift about the whole arrangement, less formal than downtown, more like a picnic that happens to include a movie. Around you, other families settle into their own versions of the same evening, some with lawn chairs set up just outside their car doors, others with children already changed into pyjamas, blankets spread across back seats in anticipation of a late night that will likely end with at least one child fast asleep before the credits roll. A group of teenagers in the next row over lean against their car's hood, radio playing low, clearly less interested in claiming good seats than in simply being out here together on a warm summer night. As the sky finishes its slow transition into full darkness, a soft chime crackles faintly from the speaker box your father hung on the window earlier, a signal that the show is about to begin. Conversations quiet gradually across the whole field, engines that had been idling for warmth or radio power switch off one by one, until the entire lot settles into something like the same hush that falls over an indoor theatre just before the curtain parts. Then the screen flickers to life, impossibly large against the night sky, the picture's opening scene stretching out far beyond anything downtown's theatre could offer, framed not by walls and a ceiling but by actual stars beginning to show themselves at the screen's upper edges. The effect is strange and wonderful all at once, watching a story unfold against the same sky you might otherwise simply be looking up at. Partway through the picture, you glance around at the rest of the lot, dozens of windshields catching faint reflections of the same glowing screen, each car its own small private world, and yet all of them tethered together by the same story unfolding above. Somewhere a few rows back, a car horn honks once, briefly, apparently by accident, and a ripple of quiet laughter passes through the nearby vehicles before the evening settles back into its hush. Your sister, already half tucked into a blanket in the back seat, watches with heavy eyelids, fighting sleep for as long as she can manage. Your father adjusts the small speaker's volume once, satisfied, and settles back against his seat, one arm resting along the open window, the warm night air drifting in and mixing with the tinny, familiar sound of dialogue and music carried through the speaker box. It is the kind of evening that is harder to find now, an entire field full of families gathered together, and yet each entirely private within their own small metal shell, watching the same enormous story unfold above them all, the whole night stretched out beneath an open sky that no indoor theatre, however grand its marquee, could ever quite manage to offer. Your father backs the car into a numbered slot, angles it just so, and hangs a metal speaker on the rolled-down window, while your mother passes a blanket into the back seat. The gravel crunches steadily beneath the tyres as he manoeuvres carefully, checking his mirrors twice before settling into position, mindful of the low metal ramp beneath the car meant to tilt the front end up just enough to give everyone inside a clear, unobstructed view of the towering screen ahead. He cuts the engine once satisfied, and the sudden quiet that follows feels different than silence anywhere else, thick with the low murmur of dozens of other families settling into their own numbered slots around you. The speaker itself is an awkward, practical little box, its thin metal cord looping down from a post planted between each parking space. Your father reaches for it carefully, adjusting the window just enough to let it hang properly, without letting in too much of the evening's warm, buzzing air. A small dial along its side controls the volume, and he tests it briefly, a burst of tinny static followed by the low murmur of pre-show music, already playing from wherever the projection booth sits, tucked away somewhere behind the concession stand. Your mother, meanwhile, has already turned to the back seat, unfolding a blanket she brought specifically for this purpose, tucking it around your sister's legs despite the summer warmth, more out of habit than any real need for warmth tonight. She passes another rolled blanket toward you, along with a small pillow that still smells faintly of home, of your own bed, brought along for exactly this kind of night when staying up late feels like part of the whole point. The car itself transforms gradually into something between a vehicle and a small temporary living room, front seats reclined slightly, back seat rearranged to make room for two children who will likely spend at least part of the evening sprawled sideways rather than sitting properly upright. Snacks are distributed, a bag of homemade popcorn your mother popped before you left the house, a few bottles of soda kept cool in a small metal cooler wedged between the front seats. Around you, other families go through their own versions of the same careful arrangement, one father a few rows over adjusting his own speaker with visible frustration when it refuses to hang properly, a mother nearby distributing sandwiches through an open window to children already settled comfortably in lawn chairs set up just outside their car. The whole lot hums with this same quiet, universal choreography, every family finding its own particular way to settle in for the evening ahead. Your father checks the speaker's volume one final time, satisfied now with the balance between clarity and the pleasant ambient murmur of the whole lot around you. Dozens of speakers all playing the same pre-show music at slightly different volumes, creating a strange, layered echo across the gravel that somehow adds to, rather than detracts from the atmosphere. You watch the sky continue its slow transition from orange to deep blue through the windshield, the screen ahead still blank and waiting, patient in its enormous stillness. Somewhere behind you, a car door opens and closes as someone makes a final trip to the concession stand before the show begins, and you catch a brief glimpse of the little building glowing warmly in the near darkness, its own small string of lights strung along the roofline. Your sister, already wrapped snugly in her blanket, asks how much longer, the same question she is asked at every stage of tonight's outing, and your mother answers with the same patient, unbothered tone she always uses, soon, just soon. The pillow beneath your head smells like home, and the seat beneath you has already begun to feel less like a car and more like your own small corner of the evening. Your father settles back finally into his own seat, one arm resting comfortably along the window's edge, the speaker's soft static murmur filling the small space between all of you. There is a particular contentment in this stretch of waiting, the whole family gathered together in a space so much smaller than the theatre downtown, and yet somehow it feels no less complete, no less prepared for whatever the evening has waiting. Somewhere across the lot, a car's headlights flash briefly as another family arrives late, searching for an open slot among the now crowded rows, and your father watches their careful manoeuvring with the mild sympathy of someone who remembers what it felt like to arrive after the good spots were already taken. It is the kind of careful, homey preparation that is harder to find now. Blankets and pillows and a speaker hung just so. An entire family settling into a single car transformed briefly into its own small theatre, ready together for a picture that has not yet even begun to flicker against the enormous screen ahead. On the screen, dust rises off a dry main street as two men square off, and for 2 hours the whole theatre seems to hold its breath along with them. The picture opens on a wide, sun-bleached vista, a town built entirely of weathered wood and dust, so different from your own tidy main street back home that it feels almost like watching a foreign country rather than simply another version of America. Wind kicks small clouds of dust along the empty street, and somewhere a loose shutter creaks against its hinges, the kind of small, deliberate detail that makes the whole scene feel lived in rather than simply built for the camera. Your father leans forward slightly in his seat, drawn in by the particular tension of the moment, the two figures standing at opposite ends of the street, hands hovering near their belts, faces set in the same grim, unblinking expression. You've seen enough of these pictures to know exactly what is coming, and yet the waiting still manages to tighten something in your chest the same way it always does. The music underneath the scene has gone almost entirely silent, just a single, low, sustained note, carrying the tension forward, occasionally punctuated by a single sharp string as the camera cuts between the two men's faces. Somewhere in the theatre, someone shifts in their seat, the small sound unusually loud in the collective hush that has settled over the whole room. Your sister, normally restless during quieter stretches of a picture, sits perfectly still beside you, eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that surprises you slightly. Even the youngest children in the theatre seem to understand instinctively that this is a moment that demands stillness, that whatever happens next will happen quickly, and no one wants to miss it by shifting at the wrong second. The camera lingers on a nearby saloon, its swinging doors motionless in the sudden lack of wind, faces pressed against the windows above, women and shopkeepers watching from safety, the same way you watch from your own seat in the dark theatre, equally powerless to change whatever is about to unfold. A dog trots across the street between the two men, entirely unbothered by the tension, and a small ripple of nervous laughter passes through the theatre at the sight of it, quickly swallowed again by the returning silence. You find yourself gripping the armrest slightly, though you could not say exactly when your hand moved there. Beside you, your father's jaw has tightened, his attention entirely consumed by the screen. Your mother, who normally finds these pictures a little repetitive, watches this one with the same rapt stillness as everyone else, caught despite herself in the particular, universal pull of a standoff. The two men's hands twitch, almost imperceptibly, and the camera cuts rapidly between their faces, the saloon doors, the dust swirling faintly at their boots, building the moment out second by agonizing second, until it feels almost unbearable. Somewhere in the theatre, a small child asks in a hushed whisper what is going to happen, and is immediately shushed by an older sibling, unwilling to miss even a single frame to answer. When the shot finally comes, it arrives faster than you expected, a single sharp crack that seems to echo through the whole theatre rather than just the screen, and one of the two men crumples into the dust while the other holsters his weapon, with the same grim, unhurried calm he carried through the entire scene. A collective exhale moves through the theatre, audible now that the tension has finally broken. dozens of held breaths released all at once. Your sister lets out a small, satisfied sigh beside you, as though she too had been holding her breath the entire time without quite realizing it. Your father leans back in his seat again, some of the tension leaving his own shoulders as the scene resolves. The saloon doors swing open at last, and the street slowly fills again with movement, life returning to the picture the same way it seems to return to the theatre around you. The picture moves on quickly after that, the town's ordinary rhythms resuming on screen, but the theatre itself takes a moment longer to fully settle, the earlier tension lingering faintly in the air even as popcorn bags rustle again and quiet conversation slowly resumes among the rows around you. It is the kind of shared, breathless tension that is harder to find now. An entire room full of strangers holding still together, waiting on the exact same outcome, bound briefly by nothing more than two men standing in a dusty street, and the particular, universal thrill of not quite knowing, until the very last second, how it will end. On a big opening night, the line stretches down the block, and strangers strike up conversation, simply because they are standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the same doors to open. You spot the line before you spot the marquee itself, a long, patient ribbon of people stretching from the theatre's entrance well past the drugstore, curling slightly at the corner where the sidewalk narrows. It is longer than you expected, longer than most ordinary Friday nights, and you feel a small thrill at the sight of it, the confirmation that whatever picture is opening tonight has drawn out half the town along with you. You take your place at the end, your family falling naturally into the same unhurried patience everyone else around you seems to share. Ahead of you, a young couple leans close together, murmuring about whether they will manage to get seats together given how many people have already gathered. Behind you, an older man checks his watch, though there is nothing anxious in the gesture, only the mild curiosity of someone wondering exactly how many more will join before the doors finally open. The evening air carries the same mix of smells it always does downtown: hot pavement, a hint of exhaust from a passing car, the sweetness of something baking somewhere nearby. Though tonight it also carries a different kind of energy entirely, a low hum of anticipation that seems to radiate outward from the theatre itself and settle over everyone waiting in line. A woman just ahead of you turns slightly and comments on the weather, an easy, ordinary opener between strangers, and your mother responds warmly, the two of them falling into a brief, comfortable conversation about nothing in particular, the kind of small talk that only seems to happen naturally when people are stuck waiting together for something they all equally want. Your father strikes up his own conversation with the man behind you, comparing notes on reviews they have each read, debating whether the picture will live up to its reputation, two strangers united instantly by nothing more than a shared destination. Neither of them will remember the other's name by tomorrow, and yet for these few minutes, standing shoulder to shoulder on a crowded sidewalk, they talk as easily as old friends. Children weave between the adults in line, chasing each other in tight, impatient circles, their energy barely contained by the slow-moving queue. A group of teenagers a few places back laughs loudly at some private joke, drawing a few amused glances from the adults nearby, though no one seems bothered by the noise. Everyone here, regardless of age, shares the same simple excitement, the same eagerness for the doors to finally swing open. The line inches forward every so often, not because anyone is being let inside yet, but because people continue arriving behind you, pressing the whole queue gently forward against itself, tightening the space between strangers just slightly more with each new arrival. You catch snippets of a dozen different conversations as you wait, opinions about the lead actor, memories of the picture's source novel, speculation about how long the show will run before it moves on to the next town. Somewhere near the front of the line, a small cheer goes up, and word travels back quickly, whispered from person to person like a message passed hand to hand, that the doors have just been unlocked. The whole line straightens slightly, a collective readiness settling over everyone at once, conversations trailing off mid-sentence as attention shifts entirely toward the theatre entrance. The line begins its slow forward shuffle, tickets already clutched in hand for those who purchased them earlier in the week, coins ready for those who did not. Your father exchanges one final nod with the stranger he spent the last 20 minutes talking to, a small, warm goodbye between two people who will likely never speak again after tonight, and yet who shared, for a little while, something genuinely pleasant. Inside, the lobby fills quickly, the crowd from outside pouring in all at once, filling the space with noise and motion after so long standing still on the sidewalk. You find your family's usual rhythm resuming, past the candy counter, up the aisle, into seats claimed just in time before the best rows fill entirely. Somewhere near the edge of the crowd, a small child asks his mother whether the whole town has come out tonight, and she laughs, telling him it certainly feels that way, gathering his hand a little more firmly in hers before the crowd carries them both further toward the door. It is the kind of evening that is harder to find now, an entire town's worth of strangers standing patiently together on the same sidewalk, trading conversation with people they will never see again, bound briefly by nothing more than a shared destination and the simple, communal thrill of waiting for the same doors to finally open. Once the lights come up and everyone spills back out onto the sidewalk, the conversation starts immediately, everyone talking over each other about their favourite scene before you've even reached the corner. The theatre doors swing open behind you, releasing the whole crowd out into an evening that feels noticeably cooler and quieter than the one you left hours earlier, the picture's final music still echoing faintly in your ears, even as the ordinary sounds of the street begin reasserting themselves. Your sister tugs at your sleeve before you have even cleared the entrance, already launching into an excited recap of her favourite moment, speaking so quickly the words nearly trip over each other. Your father laughs at something your mother says, some observation about the ending she's clearly been holding on to since the final scene, and the two of them fall into an easy back and forth, comparing their reactions the way people do only minutes after sharing an experience together before memory has had time to settle or soften anything. You add your own opinion, cutting in over your sister, who is still not quite finished with her own point. Around you, the sidewalk fills with the same overlapping chatter, dozens of separate conversations blending together into one continuous murmur of excitement. A group of teenagers ahead of you argue cheerfully about whether the ending made sense, one of them insisting it was obvious from the very beginning, another swearing they never saw it coming. An older couple nearby speaks more quietly, more contemplatively, clearly still turning the picture over in their own minds. You catch fragments of conversations from strangers as you walk, someone praising the leading man's performance, someone else complaining good-naturedly about how long the second half ran, another voice entirely convinced the ending left something unresolved that absolutely demands a sequel. The whole crowd seems to be having the same conversation all at once, in dozens of overlapping variations, everyone eager to say something before the picture's immediate impression begins to fade. Your sister finally manages to finish her point, describing in vivid detail a scene that frightened her slightly, though she insists now, walking safely beside your parents under the streetlights, that it was really more exciting than frightening. Your father teases her gently about it, and she protests, laughing despite herself, already more interested in defending her bravery than in continuing the original story she meant to tell. The marquees' glow fades slowly behind you as you walk, the crowd gradually thinning and dispersing in different directions, some toward parked cars, others continuing on foot the same way your family is, the conversation slowly settling from its first excited burst into something calmer, more considered. Your mother asks quietly what you thought of the ending, genuinely curious now rather than simply reacting, and you find yourself actually thinking about it, rather than just repeating your first impression. Somewhere behind you, another family's conversation drifts past, equally animated, equally overlapping, the same shared ritual playing out block after block as the crowd disperses through the quiet evening streets. It occurs to you that this part of the evening, the walk home, the talking over each other, matters almost as much as the picture itself, a shared processing of what you all just experienced together. Your father, still walking, brings up a small detail from earlier in the picture, something easily missed, and your mother lights up immediately, delighted that he noticed it too, the two of them comparing notes like detectives piecing together a case they already know the ending to. Your sister, quieter now, walks a little closer to your mother's side, still turning the earlier frightening scene over in her mind despite her earlier bravado. Somewhere ahead, a street lamp flickers on just as you pass beneath it, and the small, ordinary sight is enough to pull your sister briefly out of her thoughts, pointing it out to no one in particular, before falling back into quiet reflection, the picture still clearly settling somewhere behind her eyes. By the time you reach your own street, the conversation has slowed into something gentler, more reflective, the earlier excitement settling into simple, contented memory. The night around you has gone properly quiet now, porch lights glowing steadily, the picture already beginning its slow transformation from something you just experienced into something you will simply remember. It is the kind of shared conversation that is harder to find now. An entire family talking over each other under streetlights, still half inside the story they just left, carrying it together the whole way home until it settles finally into something they will keep, in slightly different versions, for years afterward. The theatre is not just where you watch a picture, it is where you run into your neighbours, your teacher, your mail carrier, all of you gathered under one roof for a few hours on a Friday night. You spot Mrs. Halloway from 2 doors down almost the moment you step into the lobby, standing near the candy counter with her own family, and she waves warmly before you have even had the chance to say hello properly. The two households falling easily into the small familiar chat that happens whenever neighbours cross paths somewhere other than the sidewalk between your houses. Further along, your teacher from the schoolhouse stands near the concession line, with someone you assume must be her husband, and you feel the particular, mild astonishment children always feel seeing a teacher somewhere outside the classroom, as though she has stepped briefly out of one entire world and into another. She catches your eye and offers a small, warm smile, and you find yourself smiling back, oddly pleased by the encounter. Your mail carrier stands near the entrance with his own children in tow, looking entirely different out of his uniform, and it takes you a moment to place him properly, the familiar face suddenly unfamiliar without the mail bag slung over one shoulder. He nods a friendly greeting toward your father, who returns it easily, the two of them exchanging a few words about the evening before your families drift toward different routes. The lobby on nights like this feels less like a commercial space and more like an extension of the town itself. The same faces you might see at church or at the grocery store or waving from a passing car, all gathered here instead under one roof, drawn together by nothing more complicated than a shared desire for an evening's entertainment. There is a comfort in that, a sense that even here, in the dark, surrounded by strangers on screen, you're still surrounded by people who know your name. Your mother pauses to chat with another mother from down the street, the two of them comparing notes on some small piece of neighbourhood news, while your father falls into an easy conversation with a man he recognises from the hardware store, the kind of casual exchange that happens naturally between people who have crossed paths often enough to feel comfortable, even if they have never learned each other's first names. Somewhere near the aisle, you catch sight of an older couple who live at the end of your street, the husband nodding a polite greeting toward your family as you pass, the wife offering a small wave to your sister, who waves back with the enthusiastic, uncomplicated friendliness children extend to any familiar adult face. It is a small moment, barely worth mentioning, and yet it adds something to the evening, a sense of belonging folded quietly into the larger experience of the night. Even strangers you do not personally know seem somehow familiar here. Faces you have seen before at the grocery store or the post office, recognised without quite being able to place exactly where. The whole theatre, on a Friday night like this, feels less like a room full of anonymous moviegoers and more like the town itself gathered together in one place, sharing the same aisle, the same darkened room, the same flickering light. As the newsreel begins and the room settles into its familiar hush, you glance once more toward Mrs. Halloway's roue, catching her profile briefly illuminated by the screen-shifting light, and feel a small, comfortable satisfaction in recognising her there, in knowing that whatever happens on screen tonight, you're watching it surrounded by people who know you, who would stop and ask after your family if they passed you on the street tomorrow. When the picture ends and the crowd spills back out into the lobby, the same familiar faces reappear amid the general bustle, your teacher exchanging a final pleasant word with your mother, your mail carrier waving once more on his way out the door, Mrs. Halloway calling out a warm good night as her family heads off in a different direction down the sidewalk. It is the kind of gathering that is harder to find now, an entire neighbourhood folded together under one roof for a few ordinary hours, not because anyone planned it that way, but because this is simply where everyone in town happens to end up on a Friday night, drawn together by nothing more than a shared marquee and the simple, comfortable pleasure of an evening spent among familiar faces. When the final reel ends and the house lights slowly rise, there is always a moment of blinking adjustment, the world outside the picture rushing back in all at once. The screen fades to black, and for just a second or two the theatre holds on to its darkness a little longer, as though reluctant to let the story go entirely. Then the lights begin their slow climb. First a faint grey glow along the edges of the room, then gradually brighter, warmer, until the whole theatre reappears around you exactly as it was hours earlier. Rows of seats, a high ceiling, hundreds of ordinary faces blinking in the sudden brightness. You squint slightly against the light, your eyes still adjusted to the screen's glow, and the theatre around you seems almost unfamiliar for a moment. Too bright, too real, after so long spent absorbed in a world of painted skies and larger-than-life faces. Beside you, your sister rubs her eyes and yawns, the particular exhaustion of a child who's been sitting still far longer than usual, finally catching up with her all at once. Your father stretches his arms overhead, his joints cracking faintly, the same small groan of relief he always makes after sitting through a long picture. Your mother gathers her handbag and glances around the theatre, taking in the room properly for the first time in hours, noticing details she had entirely forgotten during the picture. The ornate moulding along the ceiling, the faded velvet curtains still hanging motionless beside the now blank screen. All around you, the audience shifts from stillness into motion. Coats retrieved from seat backs, purses gathered, popcorn bags crumpled and tucked beneath seats for someone else to clear away later. The particular hush that held the room together for the last 2 hours breaks apart gradually, replaced by the ordinary murmur of dozens of separate conversations starting up all at once. People already discussing what they just watched, even before they have fully risen from their seats. You glance toward the screen one last time, blank and pale now under the house lights, almost impossible to believe it held an entire vivid world only minutes earlier. It seemed smaller somehow in full light, more obviously just a flat surface stretched across the front of the room, none of the magic it carried during the picture visible now in the plain, unremarkable fabric. The aisle fills slowly with people making their way out, no longer feeling their way blindly the way you all did hours earlier, but moving easily now, chatting, laughing, exchanging opinions about the ending as they shuffle toward the exit. An usher stands near the door, no longer needed to guide anyone with a flashlight, simply nodding pleasantly to each departing group as they pass. Your family rises together, gathering the last of your things, and joins the slow procession toward the lobby, the theatre behind you gradually emptying out, seats left rumpled and slightly askew, the whole room beginning its quiet transition back into stillness until the next showing fills it all over again. In the lobby, the bright, ordinary light feels almost jarring after so long in the theatre's careful darkness, though your eyes adjust quickly enough, and the space fills with the same warm bustle as before the picture began, families reuniting, conversations continuing, the candy counter's glass cases glowing steadily behind a young man already resetting the display for the next crowd. Somewhere near the doors, a small child asks his mother if they can come back next week, and she laughs, telling him they will see, the same patient answer parents have been giving all evening all over town for as long as there have been marquees to walk toward. Stepping outside at last, the evening air meets you fresh and cool, the world beyond the theatre doors exactly as it was hours ago, and yet somehow different now, coloured faintly by whatever story you just spent the evening living inside. The street looks the same, the shops the same, and yet you carry something new with you now, tucked quietly alongside the ordinary details of the evening. It is the kind of gentle return that is harder to find now, the house lights slowly rising, the world outside rushing back in all at once, and the small universal moment of blinking adjustment shared by an entire room full of people stepping together back into their ordinary lives after spending a few hours somewhere else entirely. And so, the evening winds down the way it always did, quietly, without ceremony. The walk downtown, the marquees glow, the popcorn shared in the dark, the 2 hours spent leaning forward together into someone else's story. None of it was extraordinary. All of it was enough. Think for a moment about the people who made that evening possible without ever once thinking of themselves as remarkable. The woman in the ticket booth, counting out change until her hands knew the motion without looking. The usher sweeping his flashlight down the aisle for the 100th time that night, patient with every stumbling stranger. The father backing the car carefully into its numbered slot. The mother passing a blanket into the back seat, making sure everyone was warm enough, comfortable enough, before the first flicker of light hit the screen. They were not preserving a golden age. They were simply getting through a Friday night, taking care of the small things in front of them, the way people always have. There is something worth carrying forward from an evening like that. Not the marquees, not the newsreels, not even the pictures themselves, but the pace of it. The willingness to walk somewhere instead of rushing there. The patience to wait in a line and talk to a stranger simply because you were standing next to them. The habit of really watching something together in the dark without reaching for anything else at the same time. So tonight, wherever you are, however far from 1960, maybe you let one thing move a little slower. A walk, a conversation, a moment noticed rather than passed through. History is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just a marquee and a bag of popcorn and someone beside you in the dark. And that was enough. That has always been enough. Good night.